Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm the newsman Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show. Time to check out at work and check in on those dreams. You know, it's really hard to overstate what an enormous piece of shit Robert Kennedy Jr. is. Earlier this month, the Health and Human Services Secretary convened a briefing on rising autism rates among young people, a condition he's long tried to attribute to childhood vaccines without any evidence. Kennedy touted a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which found that 1 in 31 8-year-olds is now diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. That's an increase of 5-fold since 2000. Kennedy claimed it was an epidemic that the media and public are in denial about, and he made these offensive comments about people with autism.
These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old. And these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted.
Yeah, most people with autism can do all of those things, scumbag. They have jobs, they're creative, they play baseball, a lot play baseball, in fact. They find love, they have kids, and they can use the bathroom on their own. And yes, while there are people severely disabled by autism and do require care, they too live meaningful lives. But Kennedy has an agenda here to redefine autism as a preventable disease that's caused by vaccines or some other environmental factor. That's why he disputed what the authors of that CDC report already identified as likely the biggest reason for the rise in cases: increased screening and detection. For example, the study noted that California had the highest prevalence of children between ages 4 and 8 diagnosed with autism. The state also has an early detection initiative. Quote, as part of the initiative, hundreds of local pediatricians have been trained to screen and refer children for assessment as early as possible, which could result in higher identification of autism spectrum disorder, especially at early ages. Kennedy also dismissed research that shows genetics could be a factor here. Instead, he is commissioning his own report to look into the environmental factors behind rising autism rates. And he promised he would have answers by September. To conduct the study, he's appointed other cranks like himself who already have their own conclusions, including anti-vaccine activist David Geyer, who was previously busted conducting unethical autism studies and tests on people and had his medical license revoked in Maryland over it. Given the eugenicist tinge to Kennedy's remarks about people with autism, it should cause even more concern that as part of this study, the government is going to compile a registry of Americans diagnosed with autism. National Institutes of Health Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya confirmed the plans this week. This is from the New Republic. Quote, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is using private medical records to create a registry of people with autism in the United States. The records include prescription records from pharmacies, lab testing, and genomics records from the Department of Veterans Affairs and Indian Health Service, private insurance claims, and data from smartwatches and fitness trackers. What the hell, man? Surely this should trigger blaring alarm bells for anyone concerned about government overreach and tyranny, or just anyone in general. Where's that militia movement when you need it? Meanwhile, as Dr. Bhattacharya helps RFK Jr. compile a list of autistic people, He's also putting in place strict controls on grant funding in order to protect Israel's genocide in Gaza. Medical researchers who want to receive federal grant funding will now have to submit to a loyalty test, both to the Trump administration's war on DEI and to Israel's war on Gaza. New guidelines released by the National Institutes of Health this week require recipients to certify that they, quote, do not and will not, during the term of this financial assistance award, operate any programs that advance or promote DEI, and that, quote, they do not engage in a discriminatory prohibited boycott. The only example of a discriminatory prohibited boycott, as defined by the NIH, is one that's against Israeli companies or companies that do business with Israel. So boycotts against any other country, state, company, whatever, are fine. Just not the ones that target the country currently carrying out a genocide in Gaza. NIH is essentially restricting the speech rights of hundreds of thousands of medical researchers who rely on federal funding. And it will absolutely lead to crucial studies and advancements being lost. Imagine telling future generations that we could have cured cancer or Alzheimer's, but we chose to break a boycott of Israel and create a registry of autistic people in the US instead. I know there's a lot of competition for it, but RFK Jr. might actually be the most dangerous person in the Trump administration. The Interior Department will now limit environmental reviews of fossil fuel and mineral projects on public land in order to fast-track their approval. The new approach will harm the environment, harm endangered species, and harm land that's important to Native Americans. But it will make extraction capitalists rich as hell. The department claimed that President Trump's energy emergency declaration necessitates expedited reviews. And so moving forward, analyses conducted under the National Environmental Policy Act that typically take 1 to 2 years will be limited to only 14 to 28 days. The department is also restricting reviews under the Endangered Species Act and the National Historic Preservation Act, which ensures extraction projects don't harm tribal lands and sites of religious or cultural importance. At the same time, the administration is shutting down renewable energy projects that have already undergone the full review process. Oil, natural gas, coal, uranium, and other mineral industries stand to benefit the most from this new posture. There is, of course, no energy emergency in the US that would justify limiting environmental reviews. That's just a made-up crisis by the Trump administration to justify ignoring laws passed by Congress, just like how Trump's declaration of an emergency invasion by Tren de Aragua has been used to circumvent due process for arrested migrants. The U.S. produces the most oil of any country in the world and is also the world's largest natural gas exporter. There is no emergency except for the climate crisis emergency, which would require the government to do precisely the opposite of what it's doing. Instead of fast-tracking fossil fuel projects, it would be fast-tracking renewable energy projects and shutting down dirty energy production. Oil Change International said in response to the policy change, quote, "The Department of Interior's announcement is an attempt to silence the public's voice in decision-making, taking away tools that ensure our communities have a say in the fossil fuel project proposals that threaten our water, land, and public health." The New York Times noted that Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who's a billionaire, has close ties with oil executives and little interest in stewarding public lands for future generations. He wants to let profiteers go nuts. Quote, Mr. Burgum has said he viewed America's public lands and waters as part of the country's financial balance sheet, with potentially trillions of dollars worth of oil, gas, and minerals waiting to be extracted beneath the surface. Yeah, trillions of dollars that will flow to like a couple dozen capitalists. But Trump isn't just committed to mucking up public lands in the US, he also wants to do it in international waters. On Thursday, the president signed an executive order to expedite permits for companies to mine for rare earth minerals on the seabed, just off the coast of the US and in international waters, a practice that's prohibited by an international treaty signed by most other nations in the world, but not the US. The reason it's banned is because deep sea mining is extremely dangerous, costly, and poses huge risks to the environment, like the potential to collapse the entire ocean's food chain. All right, folks, before the weekend officially kicks off, we have to take out the trash. It's time for Rich Dicks. We got some good nominations on Blue Sky, some Rich Dick skeets, if you will. Education Secretary Linda McMahon was nominated twice. She's a strong contender on news that her department will start aggressively collecting student loan payments again, including garnishing the wages of millions of borrowers who are in default. That's a real dick move. Also nominated, every NFL team owner. Safe bet that each and every one of them is a rich dick. And Michael nominated all the landlords. All of them. Good to see that one back in the nominations. Thanks again for all the suggestions, but in the end, I decide, and while Linda McMahon, NFL team owners, and landlords are all worthy contenders, this week's Rich Dick is Thomas Friedman. Yeah, the New York Times opinion columnist unveiled a new political term that he claimed applies to himself and is the pathway for Democrats to regain working class voters. You ready for it? A Whimo Democrat. Yes, as in the robo-taxi company started by Google. Friedman wrote, quote, I describe myself as a Whimo Democrat. My party's bumper sticker would read, a chicken in every pot and a Whimo in every city. Well, first off, that's too many words for a bumper sticker, dummy. Also, are you getting paid by Whimo to write this? What exactly is going on here? According to Friedman, AOC and Bernie Sanders filling up stadiums is admirable, but he claimed that they are just, quote, lazily bashing billionaires. I don't hear them solving for the future, he wrote. Instead, Friedman advised they need to be a stooge for big tech capitalists. Here's his main argument. Quote, I can't think of a more obvious moonshot project to spur advanced manufacturing in America generally than making it our goal to have Waymos or Robo-Teslas or any other brand of self-driving taxis that we can make operating in every city in America. In sum, the best way for Democrats to demonstrate they are the party of the working people is not just by promising to protect people's entitlements for another generation, but also by nurturing new industries like robo-taxis that will fund them for another generation. In the 1960s, a generation was inspired by the moon landing. In the 2020s, a generation will be inspired by the taxi industry eliminating labor costs. That's a pretty big flaw in Friedman's reasoning there. How can Democrats be the party of the working class by shilling for companies committed to displacing workers? Maybe it'd be one thing if the profits generated from the rise of robo-taxis were shared with workers, but we all know they won't be. And Friedman ain't calling for that either. Instead, we're looking at over 1 million people who drive Ubers and taxis losing their jobs. Millions more who drive trucks for a living are also threatened by autonomous vehicles. Friedman pretended to care about the job losses, writing, quote, "While I don't enjoy seeing anyone put out of work, taxi drivers are not in a growth industry. Whereas the number of better paying jobs supporting a robo-taxi network, AI researchers, engineers, data scientists, chip designers, blue-collar mechanics, electrical engineers, marketers, maintenance workers, software designers, data center construction workers, constitute a growth industry with good incomes for more people." Okay, so how exactly is that going to work, though? Who's going to pay to retrain taxi drivers who, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, are on average 55 years old? Because I know Waymo isn't. And it's not just the labor displacement that's a problem. It's the safety issues. As residents try to reclaim their cities for pedestrians and foot traffic instead of cars, Waymo wants to do the opposite. Keep more cars on the road. And then there's the partnership the company has with police. Waymo's cameras are constantly recording everything around them, giving law enforcement a new surveillance tool. This is why Waymo and other autonomous vehicle companies are reviled by a lot of people. When the robo-taxis first started getting deployed in cities on the West Coast, they were often attacked and vandalized. People would place traffic cones on top of them because, despite all the high-tech gadgets and gizmos that make them work, they'd break down if one traffic cone was placed over a sensor. The Teamsters have for years been organizing protests against Waymo, and at these demonstrations, people yell, "Waymo, hell no." This is the brand Friedman thinks Democrats can ride to electoral success. Really. It actually makes a lot of sense because Friedman has a reputation of being one of the most wrong people alive. Back in 2021, for example, he wrote about climate change and he criticized world leaders meeting in Glasgow to curb carbon emissions. Now, Friedman's criticism wasn't that they weren't doing enough to stem global warming, which would be legitimate. It was that they were doing anything at all, instead of just letting capitalists take the lead. He wrote, quote, "We will get there only when father profit and risk-taking entrepreneurs produce transformative technologies that enable ordinary people to have extraordinary impacts on our climate without sacrificing much by just being good consumers of these new technologies. In short, we need a few more Greta Thunbergs and a lot more Elon Musks." No, actually, I think one Elon Musk is enough. In fact, as we've learned in the years since that was written, one is too many. And how can we forget Friedman's defense of the Iraq War, considered one of the worst foreign policy blunders in U.S. history? Here he was in 2003 discussing why it was actually necessary.
The terrorism bubble that basically built up over the 1990s said, flying airplanes into the World Trade Center, that's okay. Wrapping yourself with dynamite and blowing up Israelis in a pizza parlor, that's okay. Because we're weak and they're strong and the weak have a different morality. Having your preachers say that's okay, that's okay. Having your charities raise money for people who do these kinds of things, that's okay. And having your press call people who do these kind of things martyrs, that's okay. And that built up as a bubble, Charlie. And 9/11 to me was the peak of that bubble. And what we needed to do was go over to that part of the world, I'm afraid, and burst that bubble. We needed to go over there, basically, and take out a very big stick, right in the heart of that world, and burst that bubble. And there was only one way to do it. And what they needed to see was American boys and girls going house to house, from Basra to Baghdad, and basically saying, which part of this sentence don't you understand? You don't think, we care about our open society? You think this bubble fantasy, we're just going to let it grow? Well, suck on this, okay? That, Charlie, was what this war was about.
Suck on this. Hey, the guy has a way with words. Can't argue with that. Friedman trying to equate 9/11 and terrorism with Iraq is exactly what the Bush administration was doing too, even though Saddam had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. It was a smokescreen to hide the real reason the US invaded: oil. Another foreign policy concept Friedman invented was Golden Arches diplomacy, in which he argued in 1996 that no two nations that have a McDonald's ever go to war with each other. A theory that was already proven wrong by the US invasion of Panama in 1989, and then proven wrong over and over again since, be it NATO's war on Yugoslavia, Israel's war on Lebanon, and Russia's war on Georgia, and later, Ukraine. The guy simply has no fucking clue what he's talking about, and never has. But he maintains his cushy gig because he has a folksy way with words and is able to couch his fundamentally conservative takes in liberal sensibilities that have broad appeal to the elites who regularly read the New York Times opinion section. And so now we can add Whimo Democrats to the heap of awful takes Friedman has been spitting out for decades. Put a traffic cone on this dipshit's head. He's this week's Rich Dick. Okay, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from South Carolina. It's from a flower farm in Beach Island. Enjoy. Thanks for the sunny. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall, but until then we'll be right here. See you next week.